A recent case in Oakland asked the question whether landlords should be responsible for housing people who don't pay their rent due to fraud. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have an interesting story for you today. It's coming out of the city of Oakland, California. Now, I don't talk about Oakland in a positive way ever because it is one of the worst places absolutely to be a landlord. And this case, in my opinion, shines a spotlight right on the reasons why I would never own real estate there, okay? So it's a bad story for both the tenant and the landlord. And the landlord is not at fault in this case. They followed all the rules that the city of Oakland and the county and the state have put in place, and yet they are still getting screwed. And I don't like that kind of thing, okay? I don't like that kind of thing because what precedent does that set? That means that the laws that even that the landlords follow to a T don't mean anything. It only matters what the feelings and the emotions are behind the story. And if that's the case, well, you can't win. You absolutely cannot win, and you're going to be forced into bankruptcy at some point in time. That's what my opinion is. And in this case, the landlord apparently is in the right, okay? Now, I understand that sometimes people, they get scammed, they get frauded, and in this story it sounds like the tenant's relative who is supposed to be paying the rent did not pay it, and that isn't the tenant's fault. Okay, we're talking about an elderly tenant who has who is blind, and he couldn't see the notices, he couldn't see all this stuff, but you have a person who has essentially power of attorney who is supposed to be handling your affairs for you, and they're not doing that. Now you're going to end up homeless, and yet you want the landlord to take the loss. Give me a break, okay? So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like, subscribe button, maybe leave a comment down below and let me know what you think. So here's a question for you, right? Do you think that landlords should be forced to house people who didn't pay their rent due to fraud or being scammed, okay? And here's a real good question for you. How do we know that the tenant is being honest about being fraud, the fraud or the scam? We don't. We just don't know that. For all we know, the tenant just didn't want to pay the rent and then is using fraud and scam as the excuse so that they can get out of it and hopefully be able to stay for longer for free. I'm not saying that's what happened in this case, but it is possible, and that is part of the reason why I don't agree that landlords should just take that loss. But anyway, let me get into the story. I'm going to try to go through the whole thing so that you can hear the entire situation and then tell me what you think in the comments. This article is coming from NBCBayArea.com, and it says, Oakland landlord won't let legally blind senior back in home despite an overturned eviction. And so, yeah, basically, landlord follows all the rules and then the judge still overturns the eviction. But let me get into the article and tell you exactly what happened. A legally blind man in Oakland says he could soon be on the street because the affordable apartment community for seniors where he lived refuses to let him back into his home, even after his eviction was overturned by a judge. If I'm out on the street, I'm not going to survive, says Gary Gilbert, 67, who walks with a cane and has a host of medical ailments. I'm just scared. My mind is racing, and I just don't know what I'm going to do with myself. My health problems make it so I can barely get around. Gilbert, a former bus driver, has called the Oakland Station Senior Apartments home since 2021. In January, however, Alameda County Sheriff's deputies showed up at his front door to enforce an eviction for non-payment of rent, removing him from the apartment and changing the locks. I was shocked as hell, Gilbert said. I was shocked and scared, everything, all at the same time. Shocked, Gilbert said, because he believed his rent was being paid on time and had no idea his landlords were trying to evict him. Because of Gilbert's eyesight and other medical issues, handling financial affairs had become too difficult, so he relied on a family member to make his rent payments using Gilbert's own money. So this is an interesting situation. Essentially, this tenant, elderly, disabled, he's blind, doesn't pay the rent on his own. Instead, he has a family member, be that a son or another relative, son, daughter, whatever, paying his bills for him. And this relative apparently wasn't paying the bills, at least according to him. Okay, and that is what led to this eviction. Okay, the thing that I just don't understand is, now, it's not like in California and in Oakland specifically that an eviction is easy or a slow process or a fast process, easy, fast process. No, it is a slow process. It is a hard process. It is expensive for the landlord. And so they had to jump through a lot of hoops to get to the point where he was actually being evicted. A lot of hoops. And if they went through all that and went through the extremely long process, and they were posting notices and doing all this stuff, and this guy didn't know, I mean, I just feel like that's just not possible that he couldn't have known. That's the way I feel. I feel like there's something being left out of the story. Like, did he never leave his apartment? And how blind was he? Could he just not, you know what I mean, not legally able to drive blind? Or was he like complete blackout blind? I don't know. That's not said in the article. He had no friends. Nobody come by and say, hey, there's a eviction notice posted on your door. He never, it just seems kind of weird to me. And so the landlord, not knowing the specifics of every medical case, is following the law and says, okay, well, you have to give them this much notice, and you have to give the notice in this specific way in order for it to count, right? And the landlord does that. Yet now the landlord is being seen as, well, you shouldn't be able to evict me. I don't think so. I think that the landlord is in the right, and that, you know what? I think that this guy might be scamming, honestly. Okay? Might be scamming, might be using his age as an excuse. And, I'm not saying that this didn't it's possible. It is definitely possible that this could have happened. Okay, I have heard of horrible cases of elderly abuse where relatives basically drain the bank accounts of their family members so that they could go, use drugs or just go shopping. And it's awful. I absolutely hate hearing stuff like that. But it seems to me that there's something being left out of this story, and I would like to know more about what kind of notice requirements are, absolutely required in Oakland, California, and if even a blind man should have known, as slow as this process was, that he was being evicted, okay? So anyway, let me continue with the story. But the Oakland station says they haven't received rent payments from Gilbert in more than a year, and Gilbert suspects he may have been the victim of fraud. Gilbert said Adult Protective Services has opened an investigation into the case, but the agency declined to comment, citing privacy concerns. NBC Bay Area was unable to reach the family member for comment. The Oakland station began eviction proceedings, but Gilbert said he was left in the dark. According to Gilbert, he had a standing request that his landlords verbally communicate any important information given his failing eyesight. But the eviction notices were in writing, he said, adding that nobody even told him he was behind on rent. So, yeah, the law requires that the eviction notices be in writing. You can't just walk up to somebody and say, hey, you're being evicted. That the law requires that it be in writing. Okay? That's pretty obvious. So don't sit here and say, oh, well, I told them, that's not good enough. Okay? If you have family members coming by and they're not reading the notice to you, if you have people coming by and they're like, hey, you got a posting on your door saying you're getting evicted and you didn't see that? Come on. Were you just sitting in there the whole day? I just don't know if I believe this story. Okay? But I'm going to give this guy the benefit of the doubt. We're going to say his story is true. And then we're going to ask the important question here. As landlords, are we responsible for this? Are we responsible? Should this be our fault that he is being evicted? Absolutely not. Okay? Absolutely not. Now, let's take any other debt that this guy owes. Okay, let's say that he had a family member who was making his student loan payment. Okay, we'll say he's a 67-year-old, he still has student loan payments, right? And he had a family member who was supposed to be making these payments for him, and the family member didn't do that. Now, does that mean that the student loan provider now has to say, well, I guess we just are never getting paid, I guess we're just going to take that loss? No, they're going to say, hey, give us our money. We don't care if it was fraud. That fraud issue, you're going to have to go after that with the person who stole the money from you, okay? But we're completely separate. You still owe us, okay? You still owe us, and we have to act accordingly. Period. It's that simple. Okay, so any other debtor, if it was a student loan, if it was a credit card bill, if he could drive, I mean, a car payment, you know what I mean? He would still absolutely face the repercussions whether a person had committed fraud against him or not. So what do you think? Okay, what do you think of this whole situation? Do you think the landlord should be responsible? Do you think the landlord should be forced to house this person even though he was a victim of fraud and he has all these disabilities and all that? I think that all is beyond the point, okay? The point is you have a contract, you were unable to fulfill the terms of the contract, you were legally evicted within the courts in a very anti-landlord place, and then they somehow were able to get that overturned, and now the landlord has to sit here and keep you housed even though you're not paying any rent. Sounds pretty dumb to me.